Hey guys, Steve Cammarata. I'm back with more of my book. This is Please Don't Die, Book 2, Please Don't Die, Dad. And I'm about to read to you Chapter 2. It's called The Life Lesson. The vast amount of love I have in my heart for my dad and the love he has always shown for me is a true gift from God and a blessing that I hold tightly in my heart with deep respect and thankfulness. His love knew no boundaries and was always given out unconditionally to myself as well as my siblings. He was firm and he wouldn't take any bullshit, but at the same time, he was like a big loving teddy bear, abundant with lots of hugs and positive praise, and he always told us how much he loved us at every and any opportunity that he had. A big thing with my dad was that everything was a life lesson. When a situation or opportunity would arise where Dad would feel was a teachable moment, he would simply say, "Hey guys, life lesson." Our little ears would perk up and we knew to be at perfect attention and in receiving mode of his information to best learn from his words of wisdom. His life lesson teaching style has become a very important tool for me now many years later as I parent my two children. My dad's life lessons went deeper than just the basics. The basics being stuff like always treat others with respect, always hold the door for a lady, always be on time or early, always be prepared, always be careful with your words, think happy thoughts, etc., etc. Although they were basic ideals and ideas to him, he was most certainly pouring the concrete for a strong foundation for building good kids into great adults. Sometimes the basics could even be funny, and oftentimes these basic life lessons would have a life lesson within a life lesson. I'll always remember this one time we pulled into the parking lot of Kmart one busy Saturday in our family station wagon. Another car had pulled in behind us, and I could tell by the frequency in which my dad kept checking his rearview mirror and making grunting and sighing noises that perhaps this woman was following him too closely. As we pulled in, my dad went one way and she went the other, as both vehicles searched for a parking space in the packed lot. And that was the last we would see of her, or so we thought. The car was pulling out of a spot, and my dad was explaining to us that when he puts his turn signal on, I referred to it back then as a tick-tock, practically until the age of 16 when he told me if I was ever going to get my driver's license, I had to use the proper terminology, call it a signal. So my dad said that when he would turn the signal on, that it was a rule, basic unwritten rule. He was in fact claiming this spot as his own by simply putting on the turn signal. So he went on to explain that it was widely accepted that the first person to be in position to take that spot that had their signal light engaged was the rightful next owner of that parking space, no matter who had seen it first. And he said this was commonly accepted protocol. Life had rules, and this was simply one of those rules. I watched his jaw drop in mid-sentence when the car that we were waiting for pulled out and another car quickly zoomed into space before my dad could even blink an eye. And I could tell he was upset. But instead, he took this opportunity to share this life lesson with us, that this person clearly must be in a hurry to completely ignore commonly accepted rules of engagement when it came to sharing the road with other drivers, and that no matter how much of a hurry you were in, you should always follow life's rules in general. He shook it off and he put on a smile, and we looked for another spot, actually finding one right up front that had recently opened up, putting us much closer to the entrance than we would have been in the first place. Back then, we didn't have electronics to put away, as kids do today, but back then it could have been a random toy or perhaps a comic book that Dad said should be kept out of sight. In my case, on this day, it was my die-cast mini replica of the world-famous Bigfoot monster truck. It was my favorite possession, and I brought it with me everywhere. To this very day, I can still remember the fresh smell of the shiny new rubber tires when I opened it up Christmas morning. Each tire even had its own plastic mini protective bag on it, keeping the tires nice and shiny as I greedily ripped open the box to get it open and set up my new toy as quickly as possible. Dad immediately reminded me to stash it under the seat so nobody would see it and try to steal it and smashing our car windows in. I really wanted to bring it into the store, but Dad said no because this is the store where he bought it and he didn't want them to think I stole it. Incidentally, it was at this precise moment that I figured out and realized that there was no such thing as Santa Claus. My brother had tried explaining this mind-blowing revelation to me a year earlier, and I refused to accept it. With my truck now hidden under the seat, we locked the doors and headed towards the entrance. Right then, we heard him casually say the words, "life lesson." Do you kids remember how I taught you how you should always hold the door for a lady? Well, as strange as this may sound, you should also hold the door open for a man as well, depending on the situation. He went on to say that this procedure had a few points of interest, and additionally there was what he called a gray area, and that sometimes you just had to use your best judgment as far as when to hold the door and when not to hold the door. Take this woman, for example, he said as he motioned to the approaching Kmart shopper walking through towards the door off in the distance. He went on to explain that there was certain distance where if someone was beyond that point, it was acceptable not to wait and hold the door for that person. This woman was right at the cutoff point, he said, or the gray area, as he called it. But today was a great day, and we're not in any type of hurry, so he patiently waited for her to approach so he could hold the door for her. My father was funny, and he made me laugh a lot. Hey, what do you know, Stephen? It's the same woman who stole our parking space. He laughed as he whispered that into my ear so she wouldn't hear him. My father greeted her with a pleasant smile, and he proudly held the door for her as if it was his job and he was getting paid for it. However, much to my father's amazement and to our own surprise as well, this woman did not even so much as make eye contact with him or acknowledge him in any way. My dad didn't do kind gestures like this because he wanted or felt need for praise. He didn't care about that, but he was huge on respect. And in his mind, one courtesy deserves another, and rightfully so. I think that a simple smile back from the woman, or perhaps even better, a polite thank you, that's all really Dad was looking for. But now he was pissed. It was at that moment we once again heard the precious words, albeit a little bit more commanding and much louder than necessary. Life lesson, kids! If a person holds the door open for you, in a polite society, you should always acknowledge and say thank you. This woman is clearly an asshole. I always thought it was funny when Dad would use swear words. He rarely said them out of anger, but usually more so to illustrate or emphasize a point he was trying to make at the time, or perhaps to win an argument with authority. Some of his swear words were used quite creatively. One of his more frequent ones was, "Maybe you should get your head out of your ass," or the ever so popular, "Don't make me lose my shoe up your ass." But the all-time crown jewel that is forever embedded in my mind would only happen when my mom was behind the wheel of the car, which wasn't very often because Dad really enjoyed driving. If Mom made even the slightest driving error or wasn't 100% up to snuff in Dad's book, he would say the weirdest thing ever. The sentence, I'm pretty sure, has never been uttered by anyone before my dad or even after my dad, and it made absolutely no sense. And it was oftentimes followed up by awkward dead silence as we tried to figure out what this could even mean. But he would say, "Barbara, you drive like I shit." My dad didn't always swear when he was mad. Sometimes you got a smack instead of an earful. It didn't happen a lot, but we were all pretty good kids. But a spanking every now and again was an acceptable punishment back in those days. My sister never got one because she never did anything wrong, and my dad always taught us boys you should never hit a woman. My brother only received one or two growing up because he was an angel and terrified of Dad's spankings, so he always toed the line. When it came to spankings, I had the market cornered, but I'm pretty sure my brother gets the award for the last spanking ever in the Cammarata house. One time, David and I were with a few neighborhood kids, and we were all about to cross the street when this fancy convertible stopped at the stop sign. There was a guy driving with the top down, and he was listening to the radio and not really paying attention. We dared my brother to throw a huge tree branch in the guy's car, and he did. We all scattered like little rats. Everyone except for my brother Dave, who was the one who threw the stick. He stood there like a statue, terrified at what he had done. "Where do you live? I'm telling your parents," the guy shouted, and slowly followed in his car behind as David slowly walked the proverbial plank to our house to face the music. As we secretly watched from hidden behind the bushes, we all knew David was about to get a serious life lesson from Dad, and this one will definitely come in the form of a spanking. David realized this as well, and he was proactive about it. And when my dad shouted for him to go to his room, he took a quick, unnoticed detour. He stopped in the kitchen first and grabbed one of my mom's baking tins and secretly put it underneath his underwear. And I'll never forget my dad's roar. Whack! Followed by, "You little bastard, I think I broke my hand." I've learned many life lessons growing up as a kid, but tougher life lessons were the ones that I learned in my teenage years, and sometimes I'd learned them the hard way. One day I was visited by my best friend Alistair. His parents would drop him off and pick him up a few hours later before dinner time, and we would usually go into the woods behind the house and climb an old tree to the fort that was built long before we moved to the area. We would smoke weed, light fires, throw rocks, whatever. Near the tree fort one time we found this huge railroad tie beam with sharp railroad spikes sticking out of it. When we heard the familiar sound of one of the neighborhood kids riding through the trails on the family three-wheeler, we thought it'd be a funny prank to put the beam spike side up in the middle of the trail and camouflage it with leaves. At the time, we really didn't think too much about the consequences and what would actually happen when and if somebody was to ride over it. We waited up in the tree for a while, but for some reason the kid on the ATV never made it over to the part of that trail and that we were on. And it was getting closer to dinner, so we decided to call it a day and head back to the house. After a short time, Alistair's parents came to pick him up, and I got ready for dinner. I had the table set, my hands were washed, and I was starving. We all sat down and said grace, and right then the doorbell rang. I don't know why, but for some weird reason I had a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. Who would ring the doorbell at dinner time? Don't people have any common courtesy anymore? Dad said as he stood up from the table. I'll get it, I said quickly, before he could say anything, and I walked fast to the door. What I saw next was not good. It was the girl that was riding the ATV, and she was covered in blood. My heart raced and I began to panic. The second thing I noticed was that I did not see the ATV. I shut the door to the house immediately before my dad could hear what was going on. But it didn't matter because he was at the door seconds later as the girl started to scream and cry. I know it was you, she screamed. I know it was you and your friend who sabotaged the trail. I crashed my ATV and it's ruined. I was about to learn 2 life lessons at once. Never tell a lie and always take responsibility for your actions. As my dad and I stood on the porch, I knew I was in deep shit. He asked me directly if I had any involvement in her allegations. My first instinct was to say, no, you are lying. I saw you and your friend back there, and I know it was you, she wailed. If my son says he didn't do it or didn't know anything about it, then I believe him because my son does not lie. I will ask him one more time. Dad said to her, and turning to me so he could look directly into my eyes, he asked me one more time, but firmly, did you and Alistair have anything to do with this, Stephen? He wasn't about to wait for an answer. I hesitated to respond, and after responding so quickly the first time, he knew right away the true answer. I was guilty as charged. My dad gave me a hard backhand directly across the face, and this was the very first and only time in my life my father had ever hit me. Besides the common spanking when I was a kid, this was the only time, and it was well deserved. The girl could have been killed, and as it turns out, she was seriously injured. As she stood in the doorway screaming and covered in blood, we found out later that she did have a broken collarbone as well as several lacerations, 2 of them that required stitches. And this was a life lesson that I wouldn't soon forget. The repairs to her ATV came to $600, and my dad insisted that I give her $800, only leaving $50 in my bank account. Additionally, he wanted me to not only deliver the money to her house in person and apologize to her entire family, but I was made to write her a sincere apology and hand it to her directly. Thank you. That is the end of chapter 2 of Please Don't Die, Dad.